Hello, and welcome back To Lead is to Learn, the podcast where we explore the dynamic world of leadership together. Whether you're a returning listener or joining us for the first time, I'm truly grateful you've chosen us as your companion upon your leadership development journey. Our mission here is simple: to empower you with the knowledge, skills, and insights needed to excel in leadership. But before we dive into today's episode, I want to express my sincere thanks to each one of you. Your trust in us means the world, and it's an honour to be part of your growth. Now, speaking of growth, did you know that To Lead is to Learn is brought to you by LAMDA Solutions? At LAMDA, we specialise in leadership development and coaching, and we're passionate about helping individuals like you become the best leaders you can be. If you're looking to take your leadership skills to the next level, or if your organisation is seeking guidance to achieve its leadership goals, I invite you to explore what we have to offer. Simply visit our website at www.thelamda.co.uk to discover more about how we can assist you directly. Thank you for being part of our community. Now, let's dive into today's episode and continue learning and growing together. In today's special episode, we will be talking to an experienced leader about their experience of leadership, challenges they have faced, and any thoughts and visions for the future.
I could think of ministers I know who frankly don't have followers. I've always resisted the phrase senior minister. It always strikes me as being a bit kind of macho posturing. I very intentionally didn't try and go, okay, I'm the boss now, you've all got to obey me. I had to earn that. I couldn't just claim it. You know, when I'm not able to function at my best, I'm probably revisiting difficulties from my childhood. Try to be the most non-anxious person in the room, because people live with such anxiety. You know, we're all beset by imposter syndrome and self-doubt. It's not for me to tell other people what they can believe, but I don't think that would be proper leadership. I think that would be more like bullying. Not only was I quite good at it, but I also kind of quite liked it. I don't think it's appropriate to try and just do lots of gags from the pulpit.
Without further ado, here's Revd Dr Simon Woodman, Minister of Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. For my first question, this is something that I do with everyone. What I'd like you to do is give us some context by sharing your current role with us and a brief summary of your journey to get there.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So my current role is I'm the minister of a church in central London. The church is called Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. It's 175 years old this year. And I've been the minister there for nearly 12 years. The word minister, it's kind of what the Baptist church uses as an equivalent for a word other people might know as vicar or priest. So it's the kind of ordained clergy person who has a position of kind of being paid by the church and freed to exercise leadership within the church. My journey to here has run for many years. When I was a kid, I went to church. My mum goes to church, still does. My dad doesn't. So I guess growing up, I saw the minister as, you know, somebody who gets to stand up the front and talk, somebody who gets to chair meetings. And there was a little thought, even as a kid, maybe that would be something I might be good at doing. So I kind of grew up thinking maybe that would be something where I could make a valid contribution. And then I went off to university and, you know, did a degree and then got married and bought a house and eventually got to that point where I was applying to train as a minister. And there's quite a long process involved in that and quite a lot of checks and balances. So I had to go through loads of interviews, psychological assessments, because, you know, when you're leading a community of people, there's a potential for people to do that quite badly. And the church take it quite seriously, and they try really hard to make sure that the people they end up appointing into those roles are actually equipped, trained, and have the right personality, the right kind of temperament to be a leader. We don't always get it right, but that's the ideal. So I trained in Bristol, and I went to a place called Bristol Baptist College and trained there full-time for 3 years. And then I ended up going as the what was called the associate minister to a large church in South Bristol. So that's those who are more familiar with, for example, the Church of England might know that as a bit more like a kind of curacy role. You're a junior person with less experience working alongside a more experienced leader in a kind of mentoring capacity. Well, that was the idea. So I turned up at this church. It had 300 members, 40 or 50 teenagers, a couple of hundred children, preschool, big thriving institution. And I'd been there 3 weeks when the guy I'd gone to work with got a promotion and became the regional minister for the area, which is, again, Baptist equivalent of being a bishop. At which point, I was kind of in my late 20s, very inexperienced, straight out of college, thrust into, in effect, having to act up into a senior leadership role that I hadn't actually gone there to do. I'd gone there to learn, not to be the senior leader. And that was the situation for a couple of years. And we had a full-time youth worker. We had another person who was a minister in training. So I was very quickly thrust into running a team. And I had to learn on my feet, really. And I made some mistakes. There are things that I would have done differently with the benefit of more experience and hindsight, but I don't think I did the worst job in the world at it. Anyway, after I'd been there 5 years, by that point, we'd appointed a new senior minister. The question was there about whether I ought to apply for that role, and I actually never thought I should. I felt I'd gone there to do a particular job, and that was I'd acted up into a more senior role for a couple of years. I never wanted to be that for them. So actually, when they appointed a new senior minister, I focused on a church plant on a housing estate. And I kind of went and worked with a much smaller group of people trying to get something going on a housing estate for a couple of years. And then my career completely changed track. And I ended up going into academia. I was called to and appointed to South Wales Baptist College in Cardiff as their tutor in biblical studies. And that was a role that also came with a teaching role in the University of Cardiff. And I went from being the leader of a church into being a member of an academic department. And I spent the next 8 academic years teaching undergraduates at the university. So I taught biblical studies, but they were people coming to study, not just for training for ministry, but just, 19-year-olds coming to do a degree in religious studies. Very interfaith. We had the Centre for the Study of Islam in the UK. We focused on Judaism. We did a lot of work on Indian religions. And I was on the kind of Christian studies side of that. And I really thought that was going to be my home. I didn't see myself going back into church leadership again. I thought, I've done that. I've moved into academia. I've got my PhD. I'm going to stick with this. But I was aware that there was this church called Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church in central London. Whenever we were in London, we'd worship there. I liked the church. It's an important church that I think needs to exist. It stands for things I believe in. It stands for things about inclusion and justice that I'm really passionate about. And to my enormous astonishment, when they were looking for a new minister, they approached me and said, "Would you like to come for an interview?" And I thought, well, you've got to say yes to that. So came down, had a couple of preachers there, got to know the congregation. It all felt good. And then I had an evening with the trustees, and it was just the most amazing evening because I felt like I belonged. And I don't know how you sense a major career shift like that, but it felt right. So Liz and I relocated to London, and I started there in early 2012. And I actually started as a co-minister. So it wasn't a junior role, but there was a woman there called Ruth, who I'd known for many years anyway, and she'd already been there for about 6 years. And I was appointed to work alongside her and with her. She wasn't senior to me, slightly senior in age, but not in terms of rank. And I wasn't senior to her. We were expected to work together and model something about co-leadership, which was a really interesting experiment to try and see how two people who are very, very different. I'm a big extrovert. She's quite introverted. We brought very different skills to the service of the church. And we actually had a brilliant time, and that lasted for 6 years. And we just worked together as the co-leaders, the co-ministers of this church. And then she moved on. She went up to Manchester to lead a church up there. And we decided not to replace her. At that point, we were needing to make a few budget cuts and wanted to spend our money on staffing slightly differently. So I became the minister. I've always resisted the phrase senior minister. It always strikes me as being a bit kind of macho posturing. So I just described myself as the minister of the church. And we've had other people working for us. We've had other staff members, other ministers, part of the team. We're going through a transition on that at the moment. Somebody's leaving. We're trying to work out what to do with them next. But I've now been the minister there for, 12 years, but the first 6 of them as co-minister and the last 6 on my own. So it's been quite a journey of transitions into a kind of an overall leadership responsibility that I wouldn't say I've ever really sought. I quite like working in a team. I quite like being collaborative. I quite like exercising leadership with others. But that kind of gives you a sense of my leadership journey.
So towards the beginning of that, you said about moving to the South Wales University where you did a bit of teaching and you worked in academia. What did you learn from that teaching side of things that then you were able to use in the future? Because you had experience of suddenly being thrust into leadership. Then you did a sort of sideways movement to teaching and then you came back to leadership. Did you bring anything back with you?
Really good question. I absolutely did. So when I was in my first church, I always used to say something like, I don't do politics. And I don't mean kind of national politics or wider politics. I mean, I don't do internal institutional politics. I always had this thing. I have no interest in the kind of petty infighting that goes on within an institution. And you don't have that option when you're in a university. I mean, universities are full of people who are fighting power because they're fighting for budgets. The way universities are structured, if you're not increasing your footprint, if you're not increasing your budget, increasing your mark in the university, you're under threat. And so you have to learn to fight and fight well within the institutional politics of a major university. And that's universal. I'm not being critical of Cardiff University for that. I loved working there, but that's the nature of the game. You have to do that kind of internal politics. And to my enormous surprise and astonishment, I discovered that not only was I quite good at it, but I also kind of quite liked it. So the kind of institutional political side of it, I found I did have more of a flair for than I had ever thought I would. And I have to say that has stood me in good stead over the years, because the church world, for all of our aspirations that Christians are supposed to be lovely people and nice to each other, and they mostly are, they're also human beings. And it's a historic institution, and there's power games, and there's budgets, and those things that I discovered at the university are also true in church world too. And I think I brought skills in how to negotiate that, how to have a thick enough skin not to take it personally, and be able to think, well, okay, we've lost that little battle, but we'll regroup, we'll come back, we'll find another way. Those kind of strategic planning skills that I learned in the university context, I have absolutely brought back, not only to my own church where I minister now, but I also have kind of wider roles within the Baptist Union, and I'm a voice for certain things and an agitator for certain things. And I think those skills have really stood me in good stead with some of that.
So in your first role, you, within a very short time, not even, blink of an eye, if you think about it, you were then suddenly thrust into leadership, which you just weren't prepared for. You said you were going there for mentoring. You suddenly had that mentor sort of ripped away from you in a sense, and you were thrown into this world. How did you adapt to that?
I think there was a little bit of startled rabbit in the headlights initially. And I think probably what I tried to do was to focus on people. So I very intentionally didn't try and go, okay, I'm the boss now, you've all got to obey me. I don't think that works in a corporate environment, but it sure as anything doesn't work in a voluntary institution. Because, in a church, you have a small number of paid staff if you're lucky. And then everybody else is a volunteer. They don't have to be there. They don't have to do what you tell them. You can't say, I'm your boss, I'm ordering you to do it. That just doesn't work. So any authority you get, you have to earn. And you have to earn it through investing in relationships, winning trust. And people give you authority because they trust you. So I think the way I coped then, and that was something that, again, that I learned fairly quickly and has stayed with me, is it's all about investing in the people. So I'm a big fan of the one-to-one conversation. I really try and prioritize having those. So I make sure that I have those with our key leaders quite regularly, but also much more widely across the institution to try and get to know people, see who prospective leaders might be, do mentoring. So yeah, investing in relationships as a leader, I think I discovered quite quickly was crucial, because I didn't have a status role that gave me authority. I was still the associate minister. We just didn't have a senior minister. So if I was going to provide leadership until we got a new senior minister, which took a couple of years, I had to earn that. I couldn't just claim it.
What's really interesting is your first role, you had this associate minister title and there was a senior minister title. So you have the associate and senior sort of prefix. You now say in your role, you don't like this label of senior minister. You see yourself as a minister. Can you see that maybe that influenced it, or is it just something you've consciously decided?
I think it probably did influence it. I think it did because, I mean, there's a little bit of me that, I'm a biblical scholar, but I also have an interest in history. Historically, senior minister is a bit of an anachronism. The word minister means servant. I mean, if you go back to the Latin root for it, it means servant. I think some of our government ministers could do well to remember that their title is, not minister in charge of, but servant in charge of. They're there to serve the people. And so putting the word senior in front of it just jars with me about what I see the role as being. It feels like you're claiming authority because I'm the senior and you're supposed to do what I tell you. And I would much rather go, look, I'm here to serve this institution. I bring my gifts of leadership and my other gifts that I bring alongside that to the congregation, to the institution, to try and help you develop, try and help you be the community that you say you want to be. So I don't see my role as being, this is what we're going to be, this is how we're going to do it. I see much more my role being, okay, what do we want to be? How are we going to do it? And then I provide leadership within that context to help the congregation be what they've said and owned themselves as wanting to be. So for me, this idea of being a senior leader in a church just jars slightly. It also feels a bit macho, maybe a bit patriarchal, and I kind of don't like it. But I respect others. I have to say, I respect others who do use it and find it helpful, but I don't think it's for me.
The last question on that introduction you gave is, you got approached while you were in your teaching role. How did that feel to you, and where do you think that came from?
So it came from the fact that I was already known to the church. So as I said, when Liz and I have been in London for the weekend to see a show or something, we would tend to worship there. So I knew the congregation. I knew Ruth, who was there already. I'd known the previous minister who was there. So I was not an unknown quantity to them. And they had somebody who'd been working with Ruth as co-minister before. So they've got this established pattern of two people working together. And he'd moved on. He went to be a chaplain at a college in Cambridge. And so they had this vacancy. And they kind of drew up a list of people they might be interested in approaching to see if they could come. And I was on that list. And so they approached me. How did it feel? Terrifying, really, because I'd really thought I'd found my niche in academia. To suddenly be invited into something which is hugely different to anything I'd done before. I mean, my first church was suburban Bristol, where the congregation lived in the vicinity of the church. You couldn't walk down the street without meeting somebody from the church. You couldn't go shopping in Tesco without somebody having a little look in your basket to see if you got too many bottles of wine in there. It was very much a kind of locally embedded community church. Where I am now, you are one couple in the congregation live within walking distance, but we draw from all over London and beyond. And we're not a huge congregation, but we're far flung. And so what is it to lead an institution where the people don't live anywhere near it? They only come together on a Sunday morning. How do you build community in that? How do you get a sense of direction and energy? How does what happens on a Sunday relate to what happens with the building during the week? All of that stuff was, again, a massive jump into the unknown for me. And honestly, 12 years on, I'm still not sure I have proper answers to all of those questions. I think it's always a work in progress. So yeah, it's been fun, but de-skilling, weirdly.
I guess if we were going to put that into an analogy into the corporate world, that would be going from like a small run business suddenly to you're now in head office. In a sense, you've now got this bigger sort of span that you have to then go across.
Yeah, I think that's right. You're just working across a very different set of parameters. And there are some skills that transfer, as we've already said, and who you are and what you bring to the role remains the same. But the context in which you're doing it is a different canvas on which to paint what you bring.
So there's one other thing I want to talk about, and that is the fact that I know that you were invited to do Thought for the Day on Radio 2. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was great. I really enjoyed doing that. That came about through Radio Wales. So basically, the way the BBC does its religious broadcasting is they try and make sure they get voices from outside of London. So when I was based in Cardiff and I got to know the producers at Radio Wales, they were looking for people to do it. So I did Christmas Day. I've done New Year's Day. It's been, I've done several of these over the years. It's really interesting because you're only on for 2 minutes, but you're aware that you're speaking to millions of people. I mean, it's a huge amount of work goes into a very small amount of time. So you spend half an hour in the studio to produce 2 minutes of usable material, just going over and over and over it again. And that's all got to be submitted beforehand and approved and edited. So you arrive with your script already agreed, and it's still half an hour in the studio to get 2 minutes of material. So I'm impressed by how much effort they put into it. But from my point of view, I just thought it was a really good opportunity to say a few things that would be heard by an audience well beyond the people who would normally hear me speaking, which, at that point was churches in South Wales plus a university context.
So how did you go about choosing the messages that you were going to give?
I'd usually try and pay attention to the news cycle. So see what's current at the time. There's a really great cliche that one of the Radio 4 comedy programs does about Thought for the Day, where they always have it, yesterday I went for a walk in the park and I saw a squirrel, and that's a little bit like Jesus. You've got to kind of really resist that easy sort of analogizing that falls into cliche. So I would always want to try and pick something that was current in the news, something that I felt I had something interesting to say on it. I would be really careful not to try and preach at people. It's not for me to tell other people what they can believe, but there are interesting things within the religious tradition that I represent that might help people understand this topic more easily, differently, shine a light on it in a new way for them. So I would try and be slightly lighthearted if possible, but also, trying to say something worthwhile that actually helped people perhaps think a bit more seriously about the issues of the day as they go on with their day.
In terms of leadership, then, that's quite a poignant thing. You have 2 minutes to share a bit of leadership, a bit of, if you think about it, thought leadership with them. It's like, how can I influence their thoughts for the day? That's quite a responsibility.
It's really interesting, and I've done a few things since. I did a wedding at the church, which ended up going quite big on YouTube. It was the little video of it was top 10 on YouTube for a week globally. And I don't think it was because of me. It was because Sam Smith was there. But, that's had millions of views. And I'm just aware that my little bit where I get my 30-second clip in that 3-minute video, that's been seen by millions of people. So I'm not a huge fan of the soundbite because I tend to want a bit more nuance and a bit more ability to take people on a thought journey. But sometimes if you've only got 30 seconds, all you've got is the soundbite, and you better make it count. Otherwise, you've wasted the opportunity to help people move on.
In terms of leadership, I actually am a firm believer in a particular definition, because there's definitions of leadership out there, like loads of them. And the particular one that I sort of go is that leadership is where a group of people choose somebody to represent them in this relationship of interactive influence, this idea that you as the leader can influence them and they influence you as the leader. How do you find parallels between that and your role? Because I think some people misinterpret and misunderstand your role as, is it leadership? So how would you take the definition I've just said there and sort of lay it with your role?
Yeah, I think the really important thing there is that a leader is somebody who people choose to be their leader. And that kind of resonates with me, that this isn't a role you claim and impose. And I mean, you could do. I mean, I could say, I'm your minister, do what I tell you. But I don't think that would be proper leadership. I think that would be more like bullying. So I think this idea that the people choose, and actually that's very real in my role. I mean, I'm appointed to my church by the church meeting. So the particular way my congregation functions in terms of its governance structure is that the ultimate authority is with the church meeting for that congregation. So I was appointed by a vote of my own congregation. And if they wanted to, they could take a vote to unappoint me. So there's a very real and immediate sense of accountability. I'm paid well, we use it the word stipend, but call it a salary. I have to pay tax on it. So I'm paid by my congregation. I'm not paid externally. I don't have some Baptist union paying me. I'm paid by my members. And if they don't put money in to keep the church running, which includes staff costs, we don't run. We don't have staff. So there's a very real and immediate sense of interplay between leader and congregation there. An interesting thing about definitions of leadership, a definition of leader that I really like is a leader is anyone who has followers. And that does not always equate to people who hold structural positions of leadership. So, in church contexts like mine, we have trustees. The trustees are elected by the congregation by a vote. And some of them bring really strong administrative skills. They might be great at finance. They might be really good on certain aspects of governance. I'm not sure it makes them all leaders. And there are some people within the institution who will never hold a structural leadership position as a trustee. But actually, when you look at them, they've got followers. And if you're going to lead this church, you need to be talking with those people because they're the people that are going to bring everybody else on board. So I think there is this real difference between people who hold structural positions that are often labelled a leadership position and people who are actually leaders. And I'm not saying that to denigrate people who are in structural positions of authority but don't have natural leadership skills. I think they bring other things. But I think we need to recognise the two are not the same, particularly in a large voluntary organisation. But you get that there was that famous story, wasn't there, about the organisation that plotted the influence of all of their people, and it turned out that it was the IT guy who had the most influence over the organisation because he was the one who had most relationships, and he wasn't on the senior management team at all. And I think you get the same thing in an organisation like mine, and it's finding those people and investing in them as a way of making sure you're able to lead effectively.
What you just said there is brilliant. This sort of measuring leadership via relationships, and that's that whole idea of that interactive influence, the fact that that relationship means that I can influence what they do and they influence what I do, that if you have more connections, you have more leadership.
Yeah. Leaders are people who have followers. And that does not always equate to structural leadership. I could think of ministers I know who, frankly, don't have followers. They hold the senior leadership position, but are they leading? And that's something I have to kind of reflect on for myself as well.
And I think as well, you said about within what you said about the governance and positions, are you a leader? Are you not? I think within an organization, we might think, okay, you've got leaders and managers that do tasks, they're responsible for tasks, but leaders, they're the people responsible for people. And I think you've done the same thing with what you've just said there.
And it's because people are people, aren't they? I mean, whether we're talking about, a university context, whether we're talking about a church, whether we're talking about a business, it's all just people. It's how do we help people achieve the goals that they've set themselves, whatever those goals may be.
Did you know that LAMDA Solutions is your gateway to unlocking the secrets of effective leadership, as well as exploring leadership psychology? We not only have this podcast where we explore some of the most topical concepts within leadership and connect you with the wisdom and experience of a community of leaders, we also have a growing treasure trove of leadership wisdom just waiting to be discovered. I would love to invite you to explore the LAMDA Library, our very own hub of thought-provoking articles and blogs, carefully crafted to spark your imagination, challenge your thinking, and ignite your leadership potential. The best part? It's completely free, and we are continually looking to update our content to keep you engaged and informed. It's all part of our dynamic journey of learning, and we can't wait for you to join us. Whether you're a budding leader, a seasoned professional, or simply looking to enhance your leadership skills, our content caters to your growth. We would also like to extend our hand. If you have a message to share and would like to submit an article to our library, simply get in touch through the contact form on our website. We would love to add your wisdom to our leadership library. Are you ready to begin your exploration? Simply visit our website at www.thelamda.co.uk and navigate to the LAMDA Library. You'll find our growing library of leadership articles waiting for you. You can then add us to your bookmarks to supplement your sources of consistent, high-quality leadership content. Discover insights, uncover strategies, and elevate your leadership game. Going then back onto my 4 questions, because we've gone very far off of them now. My second question that I had written down here was that in our sort of discussions we had via email before recording this podcast, you shared that you were thinking about what kind of leader you were and whether it was appropriate in the context that you work in as well. So can you share your thoughts around this, what you actually, upon thinking about that, what you've come to?
Yeah, I was really pleased to be engaging with you about this because I listened to some of the earlier podcasts where you were talking about outlining kind of theory of leadership and found them really stimulating. And I went to see my pastoral supervisor because I get kind of supervision. It's somebody outside of my context. And I was reflecting with him on what kind of leader I am, partly with a view to knowing we were going to be having this today. But it really raised an interesting question for me about what kind of leader am I? And I identified kind of with him 2 strands of leadership that I particularly bring. I think one of them is I'm very much a collaborative leader. So I'm always trying to draw others into decision-making processes. I'm always trying to make sure that I consult widely so that decisions that are taken within the community wherever possible. Now, that's not to say I don't have my opinions about the directions in which those decisions ought to go. And I'm honest about that, but I try not to bully people into always wanting to do it the way I do it. And there are occasions where we end up taking a decision that I then carry through, which actually isn't the decision that me personally thinks was right. But actually, if we together as a leadership group perhaps have discerned the right way forwards is this, I'll go with that and we'll work together on that, even if I've got my inner reservations. So that sort of idea that leadership is collaborative is something I hold very dear. I think the other thing I bring is I think I bring a strategic form of leadership. So what I mean by that, and this is a little bit the kind of the skills I learned at the university in terms of the politics, I think I can see several steps ahead. Like a really good chess player is always 7 or 8 moves down the line. I'm not a particularly good chess player, but I think I bring that to my leadership. So I can see how things are going to work, and I just kind of almost intuit it, because I'm thinking several moves ahead. And then I've got to work really hard to communicate with people. Well, if we do this, these are going to be the implications. Perhaps we want to hold off on this decision because we want to wait and let other things play out first. During the pandemic, we did a major business restructure of our organization. We sat down and we looked at every form of income that we could possibly generate, all our forms of expenditure, staffing. We have a grade 2 listed building in the centre of London, which is astronomically expensive. I mean, if you were planting a church in the central London now, you wouldn't lumber it with a building that costs the earth and is listed, but that's what we've got. And we had a whole range of social justice projects we were doing, working with the homeless in a particular way. Very much we were doing it on our own rather than in partnership. And through the pandemic, we took the time, meeting with our trustees, to really rethink a lot of our strategy about how we were going to be the kind of church we wanted to be. And there's been some big changes. And one of those was recognizing that our church basement, which is like our church hall, probably needed to be rethought in the way it was used. The way we were using it was financially difficult, very staff and heavy, but also it wasn't serving what we wanted to be as a church very well. And I kind of concluded that what we needed to do was to completely revamp it, do a major building project down there, really refit it so that it's fit for a different sort of use that we can then get on with. And of course, when we were all back in the building, people were going, well, can't we go back down there again? Why can't we go back down there and just start doing exactly the same stuff we were doing before? We could do that now. And I've had to help the church really hold a line of saying, actually, no, let's not just rush to redoing what we were doing before. Let's let what we were doing before die, let that wither away, and we've got good decisions as to why we want to stop doing that and not restart it, because it wasn't always the best thing to be doing. And then let's work at getting this space, whilst it's not being used, revamped. So it's taken us nearly 3 years, huge fundraising. We've had to work with partners. We actually managed to get one of London's major building companies to do it for us, part of their corporate social responsibility. So they get lots of nice photos and something great to put in their annual report about how they're contributing to community group. And, I can give them lots of nice lines about how we'll use it for really great community use, which we will. And we get a revamped basement, but it's taken several years to get there. And back 2.5, 3 years ago, when I was telling people, hold off, there's a better future here for us, I could see this end game. Not everybody could. Other people were just saying, oh yeah, but we're not using it. We're not doing the things we should be doing. And so I had to help them see 3 years down the line to a better place. And actually, the building work's about to finish later this month. It's going to be amazing. And now we're planning what we're going to do with it. So that just gives you a little example of how I think I bring a strategy to leadership that other people don't always have because they live more in the moment.
I think that's a really powerful story. And also you have to realize within that is you managed to adapt within a very difficult situation. I mean, COVID was a massive situation for everyone in every work of life. And then you're having to, in a very short period of time, pivot and go, okay, how are we going to use this as a positive to affect the future? So I think that's a really powerful story that you shared there.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
I think as well, you've highlighted two things within there. I sort of made a note as you were going through, like you've picked out two strands, which was your collaborative side of things, which is a very democratic style of leadership.
Yeah.
Then you have your strategic bit that you just did the example for. And through there, you highlighted two other skills, which I think it might be worth reflecting back to you, which is strong communication skills. You had to communicate the reasons why you want to do what you're doing. Bear in mind, you're seeing further than they are seeing at that moment. And then also having relationships, building and establishing those relationships with different stakeholders, including external stakeholders. They are very important leadership skills. And I'd like to sort of look at those last two, which I reflected back to you there, the communication and the relationship with stakeholders, and ask you, did you receive any formal training on how to do those two things effectively?
No, I don't think so. I mean, communication to an extent, because, part of my job is public speaking. So, I have been trained in how to structure an argument, how to present in a way that communicates clearly, how not to kind of get too lost in an argument and lose people along the way. There's an element of communication that kind of comes with the job. And actually, I'm going to segue slightly, but I noticed that in the university context, when I ended up teaching in university classes, many of my peers were people who got that job teaching university because they were absolutely brilliant researchers and they'd excelled in their PhD and they'd done their research, but they hadn't been trained in how to present. And so you end up with this kind of cliche of somebody who's very bright standing at the front and kind of mumbling into their notes or just reading points on a PowerPoint and not taking the class with them. Well, I think, I'm not the world's greatest academic. I mean, I'm all right, but, others are much better at that than I am. But where I excelled at university was communication. I could hold a class for an hour and we could have a lot of fun in that time and they'd learn. So I think that communication stuff is honed partly in the training, but also just by doing the job of being a regular public speaker. I mean, every week I get to stand up in front of people and you learn pretty quickly what's not landing because people tell you. So communication side of it, I think, yes. The kind of engaging with wider stakeholders and investing in those relationships, I think, no, I don't remember that being part of my training. But for me, I think it's really important. So I actually put quite a lot of time into involvement outside of the church. So, for example, I'm part of the Camden Charities Chief Executives Network. So I'm going into that space alongside people who are chief execs of other charities in Camden. Initially, one or two people were like, well, what's a church vicar doing here? And I'm like, I also am a leader of a large voluntary organisation within your area. And they're like, oh, yeah, I suppose you are really. So I do put myself in those places where you get to relate to others who have parallel jobs in often the voluntary sector, less of the corporate sector, but I'm more involved in the voluntary. And, I think that puts you out there and in spaces where you then find out the links that can begin to unlock further opportunities for development, both in yourself and within your institution.
In terms of the storytelling, in movies and TV series, often like the church and the minister who's giving the sermon, it's very much a storytelling kind of way of bringing people along a story. And I think it's really quite ironic that a lot of leaders now, they're reading books, and some of the books are like all about how to communicate with people using storytelling. It's a skill that has been used for a long period of time, but only now are people in the wider community going, actually, I need to learn this skill.
Yeah. I don't believe the sermon's dead. There are people who say, the idea of sitting there and listening to somebody drone on for 20 minutes as they preach at you, that's a dead skill. To which I would say, go to any stand-up club. People happily sit there while somebody stands at the front and monologues at them for 20 minutes. It's not an inherent problem with hearing somebody talk for 20 minutes. People do have an attention span that can hold that. It's just whether the person's any good or not. So, I pay attention. I don't try and be a comedy person. That's not my style. So I don't try and be the comedian for the church, but I do pay attention to people who make a living out of public speaking. And a lot of that is people on the comedy circuit, because you watch how they hold an audience. And then you think, actually, there's stuff I can learn from that. I won't do it the same way because I'm trying to talk about different stuff. And I don't think it's appropriate to try and just do lots of gags from the pulpit. I do think there's skills you can learn there. I'm sure the same is to be true in the business world when you're seeking to communicate to people. So a really great example of this, I did some chaplaincy down at King's College London, which is one of London's major universities. I'm the Baptist chaplain there. They appointed a new principal a couple of years ago, and he has been releasing a little sort of 6-minute video every week or every couple of weeks, which goes out to all staff and all students. And he's obviously working really hard at how to be the personal face of the institution that he represents. Now, in his case, you've got tens of thousands of people, staff, medics, different schools, all the students. But he's working really hard at putting a personal face on that and talking to people. And he does it brilliantly. And again, I think there's a lot to learn there about how somebody who's in a really high structural leadership position, who clearly can't talk to everybody, is still finding a way to talk to everybody.
It's trying to find that personal connection with people.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the level is, it's having that personal connection. And I think if you put that effort into making that personal connection, you can't help but connect with that person.
Yeah.
At LAMDA Solutions, we don't just explore leadership, we aim to elevate it. I would like to share something extraordinary, our roadmap for your leadership journey, both personally and professionally. Whether you're an individual leader seeking growth or an organisation striving for excellence, LAMDA Solutions can help you along your journey towards leadership excellence. Picture this, you as a leader standing at the helm of your organisation, surrounded by your fellow leaders, all filled with inspiration and equipped with the tools to steer your teams towards success. That's where we come in. Our leadership consultancy services are designed to transform leaders and with them their organisations into true powerhouses. If you're ready to transform your organisation's leadership, visit us at our website www.thelamda.co.uk and explore our consultancy services to see the packages we offer and the possibilities they hold. With us, by your side, we can take your organisation on a journey of discovery, growth and empowerment. And it's there, just waiting for you to embrace the potential. Watch as your team flourishes, drives innovation and achieves new heights. But that's not all. We understand that every leader is unique and your growth is deeply personal. This is where our coaching services come in. We can be there as a consistent beacon, guiding you through uncertainty, growth, and any challenges, supporting you in the moments of need along your quest for professional excellence. Imagine having someone by your side, a coach who understands your goals and challenges and empowers you to achieve your full potential. Our leadership coaching services are that guiding hand you've been searching for. Unleash the leader within you with our one-to-one coaching packages, tailored to your aspirations, whether you're an aspiring leader, a seasoned professional, or somewhere in between, we at LAMDA Solutions are here to support you on your journey. The time has come for your leadership story to shine. Visit us at www.thelamda.co.uk to explore the world of possibilities with LAMDA Solutions. One of the other things that you said within our email back and forth was that one of your trustees, and you've mentioned your trustees several times throughout our discussion right now, criticized you recently for not being a leader.
Yeah.
Can you share with us what happened there, build a little bit of the sort of dialogue around that, and then your thoughts and feelings that came from that?
Yeah, it raised a really interesting question for me. I think the challenge I had was to do with, am I a leader or am I a manager? So am I just kind of managing process, or am I providing that strategic lead? That caused me to do quite a lot of reflection on what my leadership style is and whether I am a leader. It caused me to stop and think, well, crumbs, maybe I'm actually not really a very good leader after all, because, we're all beset by imposter syndrome and self-doubt. It often doesn't take a lot for me to plummet. I usually bounce back, but a challenge like that, and I'll think, oh my goodness, maybe I am terrible at this after all. I think probably what I would reflect is that there are very different styles of leadership. And it may well be that, this is somebody who's been very, very senior and successful in the business world and has a particular model of leadership that they have exercised and that they've appreciated. And I'm probably not, by their definition of, or their understanding of leadership, I'm probably not leading. And I suspect some of that's to do with my values around collaboration, taking people with me, not being the one who's 10 feet out in front, striding ahead and beckoning everybody on. So it kind of knocks you a little bit when you get those kinds of critiques, even though I know it was very well meant. And it was an invitation to reflect. And I've tried to take it as an invitation to reflect and to learn. But yeah, there is that moment when you think, oh gosh, I'm going to jack it all in then. I'm no good at this. And I'm assuming I'm not the only one who suddenly has moments of massive crisis of doubt and personal confidence sometimes, because I really do.
You mentioned imposter syndrome within that as well. What do you think causes imposter syndrome, particularly for someone like you who's been in a role for a long period of time, and then you get this bout of imposter syndrome despite the fact you've got these years of experience behind you?
Yeah, we could get quite psychoanalytical on this. I've done some psychotherapy, which was very helpful to me. I had a year of weekly psychotherapy, and what I learned there was when I become sort of dysfunctional as a person, when I'm not able to function at my best, I'm probably revisiting difficulties from my childhood, and those are those emotions of being maybe disempowered. Kids don't have a lot of power. Kids have to do what their parents tell them. Kids have things that, the world controls you as a child. And then you suddenly find yourself as an adult, and suddenly you're expected to take these really quite important decisions sometimes. And I think we very easily slip back into those very early learned patterns of, I don't have the capability to do this. I just need somebody else to tell me. Because we go back to when we felt secure. And actually, there's something quite secure as a child about, your parents tell you what to do. You do your homework, go to school, go to your musical instrument lesson. All of those things are kind of laid out for you, and you live within very strict boundaries. And I think you get to midlife and you're suddenly in a senior leadership position, for example. Actually, I just need somebody else to hold this. I can't do this anymore. I think what we're doing is we're revisiting those childhood emotions. And I don't think we're doing it in a bad way necessarily, because we're actually revisiting a place where we felt relatively secure, hopefully for those of us who had reasonable childhoods. But Chris, we grew up next door to each other. We have shared childhood memories, although there's a bit of an age gap between us. But I think, you go back to your childhood. And I think as long as you know that's what you're doing, and you can say, actually, just now I need somebody to hold this for a while because I feel inadequate to the task and I need somebody to hold me rather than me having to hold everybody else. I think that's okay. But when it overwhelms, and, this is where I think it can become a real problem, you end up just losing total confidence in your own ability, and then you don't snap out of it. I mean, I usually find if I'm in that place, I need to just give it 24 hours, have a night's sleep, maybe watch something nice on the telly, come back to it fresh the next day, and things feel different. I often find a particularly low time for me is Sunday afternoon. So, I give it my all on a Sunday morning. I'm standing up the front, it's high energy, I'm engaging with everybody, you have tons of conversations, you're really, really focused, putting it all out there. Straight after that experience of being full on in the community, first thing I am is really hungry. So I don't normally eat a lot at lunchtime, but Sunday I need proper food straight after that. And then I'll often find, as I'm reflecting on it, I'm going over and thinking, that didn't go as well as it could have done. You should have done that differently. You saw that person, but you didn't get to talk to them. Are they all right? And that's when the negative emotions can start to overwhelm. And I come to recognize a pattern there. And I just have to say to myself, go easy on yourself on a Sunday evening. It'll feel better on Monday morning. And it does. But I think, some leaders, that can really crash in on you and disempower you. And I think that's when imposter syndrome goes from being a natural part of the rhythm of it to being something that can be quite crushing.
I've done a blog post on imposter syndrome. I've actually done like a series of 2 of them. And one of the things I reflected upon when I was doing it is quite linked to what you said about childhoods. And often it's the inner child. No matter how old we get, we still have that inner child in us. And I'm a firm believer that our inner child is looking for recognition for everything that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly you're thinking about the Sunday evening afterwards. And I'm thinking, as you're talking, could that be that maybe that looking back going, did I do a good enough job? Did I do a good enough job? That could suddenly lead to imposter syndrome. Is you're trying to find those moments of recognition that tells you that you did a good job. And I think particularly in the world we live in now, there are different ways that people interpret recognition. So for some person, a pat on the back might be something. For someone else, a little gift to say thank you, or words just of encouragement. And one person can give you recognition, but if you're looking for another form of recognition, you don't recognize that recognition coming from there. I think we as a society almost need to get better at understanding that different people need different recognitions. And particularly as a leader, it can be, they say, very lonely at the top. Often people down there see your success and go, you don't need recognition, you've got the position. I think maybe as a society, we need to get better at that.
I think that's really wise. There's a bit of an adage that I can't remember what the ratio is, but it's something like you need 3 positives for every negative in order for the negative not to overwhelm you. And sometimes the negatives, they come from people who mean well. They want the church to thrive. They want you to be a good minister. So they tell you where you've screwed up or where they think you've screwed up because they want you to be better. What you hear is you're an idiot and you screwed up. And, it's that having a thick enough skin to say, I'm hearing this as a very critical thing, but I know it's coming from a place of shared values that we want this to be better. And that's a place to rebuild the relationship and then move it into a better place rather than staying in that position of you hurt my feelings.
I think as well that if you are a words of affirmation kind of person, you need those words to feel good about yourself. Equally, if someone then says something negative, you recognize that negative as equally as you would a positive.
Yeah.
That can add more in the negative column, if you like. And then suddenly you start going, oh, am I doing a good job?
Yeah. Really, really interesting, Chris. Thank you. Really good insight.
In terms of what you said about your trustee saying you're not a good leader, I love that upon reflection, you've taken that and you've said, okay, I'm now going to reflect upon myself and my leadership to try and find what type of leader I am and where I sit as a leader. How long did it take you to make that transition between being questioned in that sense and then you having that positive spin on it?
I think a few weeks, if I'm honest. I sat there and kind of heard it as a critique and then had to go away and reflect and talk to somebody else. I mean, for me, I learn most through talking to other people. I'm learning a lot through talking to you now. I see a spiritual director every 6 weeks. I see a pastoral supervisor every 6 weeks, somebody with whom I can talk through the things that have happened. That's good practice, I think, for a leader to have that sounding board, somebody they can talk to. I think without that, you just get trapped. So for me, it was part of that process of talking through with somebody else and going, okay, here's something that somebody said to me. I haven't been able to shake it. I haven't been able to go, oh, well, that's just them. It stayed with me, and I need to unpick why it stayed with me and see if I can then, draw positives from that and learn and be better as a result of it, rather than just going, oh, blow them or something like that. I didn't want to do that. I mean, sometimes people just launch stuff at you and you think, well, that's coming from a bad place from them and I've just got to let it go. But whilst I was initially, oh, that's a bit hurtful, actually where I got to was, this person wants me to be better because they want the same thing I want, which is that I want to be better too. So how can I turn it into an opportunity for positive reflection? And I needed to do that through talking to others. Is it common practice in the business world for senior leaders to have that kind of supervision or sounding board themselves? I don't know how that works.
I think in your world, there is such a good support network. There are these people put in place for you, and it's only just being used within the wider community. We have, for example, coaching, something that I'm really a big advocate for, where leaders need to sometimes have that safe space to explore their practice and then look forwards of how do I then improve. And it seems to me like you have coaches in place. What role does your spiritual director and your pastoral supervisor, what separate roles do they have, so that we can maybe identify where in the business world there are parallels?
Yeah. So I've had a spiritual director for a long time. None of this is compulsory, actually. This is one of the interesting things. I think it should be. But I have chosen to have a spiritual director since I was ordained. So that was 1999. I've had one ever since. And I've seen, it's been a couple of different people because I shifted somebody when I moved to London. But I see maybe 6 weeks or so. That is an opportunity for me to talk primarily about my inner spiritual world. So the values that drive me, the kind of person I want to be, where I get my energy from. So, engaging with the sort of pastoral, not quite pastoral care, but engaging with my spirituality, recognizing the things about me that energize. So he might say to me, are you putting time into prayer and meditation, for example? Or are you just bundling from one thing to another and never stopping for those moments of inner reflection? I swim a lot. I mean, I was in the pool at 6:30 this morning. I find swimming really helps me center myself, discover that still core. And my spiritual director will say to me, have you been swimming? Have you been running? Not because he cares primarily about my fitness. He cares about me as a holistic person. What I was finding was that I was also using him as a sounding board for the practicalities of my job. And I would bounce off him questions about practice rather than about the care of me as an individual. And that led me into thinking I also needed somebody to be a pastoral supervisor. And that's somebody with whom I will talk about the frustrations of, chairing meetings, difficult decisions, the much more, I guess that's probably closer to coaching. It's much more focused on my practice as a leader, whereas the spiritual director is much more focused on the care of me in my inner world and who I am and the values that drive me and how I nurture those. So I don't know, do they track on to things that you encounter in the business world?
I think in a sense, yeah. In terms of your practice, where you just said, just so I can get a little bit clearer on this, is your pastoral supervisor someone who's experienced in your role, or is it someone that you just use as a sounding board?
No, it's somebody who's got a background. So actually the person I see is somebody who's the principal of a college that trains Anglican vicars. So he's had years of doing the job himself and has then risen into a role where he's the head of an organisation that trains people. And he very kindly makes time available every 6 weeks to spend an hour with me.
So to me, what I'm sort of reading, interpreting these as is a pastoral supervisor could almost be a mentor, someone who has experience that you go to for guidance and gives you advice.
Yeah.
Whereas your spiritual director, the person that you talk to spiritually, that to me is a bit more of a coach. That's someone who's there to have a safe space to help explore yourself.
Okay.
Because one of the things that's different between a mentor and a coach in the wider world is you go to a mentor for advice on things. They're someone who's been there, seen it, done it. Whereas a coach is someone who creates that space, sort of explores like a problem you're currently experiencing. And it's very much what we would say forward looking. So it's like, okay, so you've got this problem. What would it look like if it was solved? How could we get you from here to there? How do we get you to where you want to be? So I feel like your spiritual director is a coach and your pastoral supervisor is a mentor.
That makes a lot of sense. That's really helpful. I love seeing how those two track against each other.
And it's really nice that actually, as we explore this, for me, like it's a world which people wouldn't necessarily see your role as a classic leader. They might, oh, you're a CEO of a business, you're a leader, but as a minister of a church, they might not necessarily see you as a leader. But actually, as we look and explore this even more, you can see just how parallel the two are and how much you're doing such good practice that we in the business world need to try and do. I think the one thing that maybe keeps that barrier apart is the fact that in the business world, for someone to get coaching, they're going to have to pay for it themselves. It's not put in place by organizations. This is something that they have to seek out and they have to pay for. Do you pay for, or are these people that voluntarily give their time to you?
They don't do it voluntarily, they're paid. So for many years, I paid for it myself. So when I saw a spiritual director in Bristol, I paid for that myself. I mean, we're talking about 60 quid for an hour. So it's not a huge amount, but there's, it's equivalent to paying a counsellor kind of level of payment. Actually, my current church are very generous and very supportive. A few years ago, the treasurer said, "You see a spiritual director? I never see any invoices for this." And I was like, "No, I pay for it myself." And he said, "Well, we should be doing that. We should be supporting you in this." And so actually the church I'm in at the moment cover my costs for both my director and my supervisor. But that many other ministers are not in that fortunate position. I mean, many ministers are in churches where there's big financial problems and, they're just barely making ends meet. So I do recognize I'm in quite a fortunate position there.
So if your organization is your church, in terms of that, what benefit do they see from your involvement in these two people?
I don't know that they see it obviously, as in I don't suppose most people in the church would know that I see these people. It's not something that I make a big deal of. I think what the benefit is, I've not had a nervous breakdown, and I hope I'm a better leader as a result. I think that the benefit is in what I bring back to them in the role that I'm in.
And I think within the business world, they'd be exactly the same. Organizations wouldn't look at someone getting a mentor, someone getting a coach and going, okay, this is going to immediately give me productivity increase. But actually, if the leader is a better leader, they can lead their people better and those people can grow and do better things.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's about caring for the leader and helping them be the person that they can be.
And if you're clear of mind and you're centered, you're going to make better decisions.
Yeah. One of the things I try and say to myself is try to be the most non-anxious person in the room, because people live with such anxiety. And I think one of the things you can bring as a leader is actually to reduce that anxiety, make people feel secure, held, safe, challenged, pushed, sure. But I think there's a real gift of non-anxiety that a leader can bring into a situation. But in order to be able to bring that with authenticity, you've got to work on your own inner anxieties and do that work on yourself before you can bring that to the organization.
There's a quote that I see, it's banded around quite a lot in the circles that I'm in and what I follow on LinkedIn, and it's, you are what you see. So you become what it is you experience, what you see from others. And if you as a leader are anxious and are feeling stressed, you're more likely to find your followers are also going to reflect that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You pointed out anxiety there, and it is something that I think is becoming more prevalent in society right now. A lot of people are feeling anxiety, whether that's financial stress right now or things like that that's going on in the world. But over the last 20, 30 years, it's definitely been a growing phenomenon. What do you think has led to that?
I think philosophically, people who analyse where society's at talk about the move from modernity into postmodernity. And one of the shifts, one of the markers of that shift from modernity to postmodernity is what they call the decline of the meta-narrative. This is the idea which gives meaning to your life. So for some, that was religion. But for others, it would be a political ideology. So the idea that there's a narrative that gives structure and meaning to your life. And if you can trust in that narrative, then that helps you be less anxious. And I think we don't find those big narratives compelling in our society any longer. So membership of political parties is a fraction of what it was. Attendance at church, as I know well, is a fraction of what it was. And I think people are instead constructing their own narratives by which to live, and they're kind of picking a bit from here and a bit from there. And so we're exposing ourselves to so many competing and divergent voices. And there's much that's good in that. I mean, I'm not sure I'm a fan of the grand narrative. I think it can be highly manipulative and quite abusive. So I quite like the fact that we're suspicious about anybody who tells us how to live our lives. But I think one of the consequences of that is we've not got anybody telling us how to live our lives. And whilst that's a good thing, that's also a really scary thing, because it means we have to take much more responsibility for what are we going to believe, how are we going to vote, how are we going to survive financially, what are we going to do? You know, the idea that you'd enter into a career at the age of 17 when you leave school and enter into a trade, and that's your career until you retire when you're 60, that's gone. You know, we don't have those things in which we can trust. Capitalism is not supporting us and saving us in the way that we thought it might. And again, I'm not against capitalism. I think it's one of the great drivers that lifts people out of poverty. But it also, we don't have these stories to live by. And I think that leads to a massive rise in anxiety amongst the population, because we're scared. We don't know what decisions to take. We don't know how to live. The cost of living crisis is huge. I see people who are on the edge of homelessness and living in homelessness every single day that I'm in the church. People are in trouble, and that leads to anxiety. And then within the historic institutions, such as political parties or the church, we've got less people coming. That's less money. We're not able to be and do the thing that we were able to be and do 30 or 40 years ago, which people remember fondly. That's very anxiety inducing, because the thing we love, the thing we commit ourselves to, is withering on the vine. And that's very anxiety inducing for the people who come along and go, where's everybody gone? And I'm not just talking about my congregation. All the historic denominations are seeing dramatic decline. So whilst at one level I'm kind of there with this, I recognise it puts pressures on people.
I think that's the best answer I've actually ever had. It makes so much sense what you said about this narrative going through. And I think now, like, there are also organizations, there are businesses, there are products out there that are trying to play off of that as well, adding a narrative, adding something to give you meaning for a very short period of time, just to get you hooked onto things, to then, you know, leave you wanting and waiting.
Yeah.
I'm thinking just like Netflix binge series. People have a meaning of just, I'm going to binge this for about a week, and then suddenly that meaning's gone and you get that remorse.
Yeah, you're bereft. I mean, for me, it's a book. If I'm really invested in a book and then I finish it, I feel like I'm bereaved because my book's ended. And my fear with all of this, and this may be a slight sidetrack, is that it makes people prey to narratives that are profoundly unhelpful. So I think the rise in populist nationalism, for example, I think this part of this is the driver behind Brexit. This fragmentation, we don't believe in Europe anymore. Europe is not going to save us, and it never was. But I think that was the demise of a grand narrative that we would never go to war again because we construct a united Europe, and the breaking apart of that. And my fear is it drives people into sort of right-wing nationalistic populist politics, because it's something that's very clear. It's clearly articulated. Join us. Join people who look and believe exactly like you. Will give meaning to your life. And I think that's very worrying.
And you see it within radicalization of particularly very vulnerable young people trying to find this narrative. Someone gives them a narrative and then...
Yeah. So, I don't see my role as to say, hey, everybody, you should all come back to church. I'll tell you what to think. I absolutely don't see it that way. But I do think that organizations such as the third sector organizations, which includes religious institutions, can really help people find that sense of rootedness again. I mean, it might be the church, it might not be. It might be some other organisation that exists at the level of civil society. I mean, my wife runs the volunteer centre over in Kensington and Chelsea, so she's very embedded in all the charitable organisations that exist. And people get a huge amount of meaning out of things like volunteering. Pick a charity, go and spend some time there, and those sort of worthwhile ways of gaining meaning to your life, I think, are really, really important. And it may or may not be religion, it could be something else, but that giving something back to society actually gives you meaning. And I think there's something really positive that the third sector can offer that sits alongside the kind of the business sector of society.
In terms of the role of a leader within this, so there is quite a big sort of missing leadership skill set across business, across society, and people aren't necessarily trained to be leaders. I mean, remember at the beginning of this conversation, you said about how many of our ministers, in terms of the MPs, they need to kind of understand that minister is servant and that you're serving people. What part do you think that a leader, whether it be our MPs, whether it be the leader of an organisation, what part do you see them playing in helping individuals find a narrative for them to give them a little bit more meaning for what it is that they do?
I would say lead by example. You said you become what you see, or you are what you see. I think if we were to see our leaders in society, in business, in third sector, in education, actually embodying better values about, I'm not just in this for the money, but I want to create opportunities for corporate volunteering, for example. And I'll see you when we're in there, painting that church hall because it's going to be used by the homeless people. I think, if you've got leaders who embody these values, that can really help unlock it for people because it gives them a role model. If all we see are leaders who are just working for them and their mates and trying to take money out of the system whilst they're still in a position to do so, I think that breeds cynicism and dysfunction. So I just want some good old-fashioned leaders who live with integrity and live out the values that they speak.
I think there is going to be this, for a large amount of people, this missing part. I almost picture it as almost a pyramid. I mean, I hate hierarchies, but there is almost a pyramid, and everybody at every level needs a role model to look up to.
Yeah.
And I think what we're missing in society right now is someone that is right at the top to be that ultimate role model that you can guide yourself by.
Yeah.
Like the Martin Luther Kings, these people that are just, they are the ultimate leaders. And I think we're missing them.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that it's there to be taken. I think it doesn't have to be our senior politicians. I mean, Martin Luther King, who preached at my church, by the way, in 1961, he died at the age of 37, can you believe? But he became a global leader just by standing up and telling the truth about the injustice he saw. He didn't have to do anything more than that. He just told the truth. And then he organised. So he was really involved in community organising. So he was trained in it. He worked with other leaders to effect social change. So, Rosa Parks did not wake up one morning and sit in a white person's seat on a bus because she felt like it. They had planned that. They knew what that was going to do. They knew it was likely to lead to the Alabama bus boycott and that was going to generate national news headlines. So I think this is where the strategy in my brain starts to click in. It doesn't happen by accident. You can plan for it. And I think working collaboratively with other institutions and other organisations, we're working with one of London's biggest builders. to revamp a basement that's going to be used for doing amazing things. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you plan for it. And I'm involved in community organising in London. So I work with churches, mosques, synagogues, community groups. We work together on the issues of social justice that matter to all of us. And one of the things we do is the power analysis. Where's the blockage to the change we want to see? How can we make sure that when we get in the room, we've got enough power to win the change that we believe needs to happen? So all those things around power analysis, around relationship building, all that stuff doesn't happen by accident. It happens because we intentionally make it happen. And out of that can arise the leaders with integrity who are saying, not I'm in this for myself, but here's the thing we want to see better in this world, and here's how we can work together to achieve that. And that's the sort of leadership I think we need within society.
Yeah, there's two steps to that, which you said. One is having a vision to envision a change. And another part to it is, it's all well and good saying that, but unless you have that strategy of how we're going to achieve that, you're not a strong enough leader that's going to guide people to that change. You're just highlighting, we want to be over there, and then walking away.
Yeah. Martin Luther King didn't just stand up and go, hey, isn't structural racism in America terrible? He did that and did it very compellingly, but he also strategized about what the actions needed to be to begin to unlock change. And that, for me, is the really interesting bit. How do you turn the public face of this into genuine change in society? It's really interesting.
There's another leader from back then, which I always quote at the beginning of every leadership training that I deliver. I always put a picture of JFK there and saying about him envisaging we're going to go and put a man on the moon. And then behind the scenes was all these other people that bought onto that and then put in place the strategy. And I think it's quite apparent to me that back in those days, there were these strong leaders, and they were, for the first time, I guess, broadcast across the world for people to see. Whereas now it's so watered down and we don't necessarily have those strong leaders in place. A lot of the people that are broadcast everywhere, it's the negative side of things. You know, the Boris Johnson situation, Donald Trump over in America, those sorts of people who are in leadership positions that actually are very divisive. They're not bringing people together. They're almost causing people to go their own separate ways.
Yeah, well, they're just after power, and the wrong kind of power. Well, power is neutral. They're after power for their own ends. And I think we need to take back power for the common good. And I think that's true in business and in the charity sector and the education sector. I think across the board, power's like money. You know, if you haven't got any, you're probably having a pretty crap time of it. But if you have got some, you've got choices about how you use it. And I think there is a leadership to be embodied that uses power well.
And at some point, someone's going to rise and they are going to find themselves at the top of my imaginary pyramid.
Let's hope.
We've had a really amazing and in-depth conversation about leadership. One thing I always try and make sure that we get before the end of every podcast is I ask everybody who comes on, if they were to meet a younger leader, someone who's only just starting their journey into leadership, what piece of advice or what lesson that you've learned would you like to give them?
I think I would want to say, have the confidence to bring your whole self to the task and don't try and be somebody else.
What does the whole self look like to you then?
I think it means your strengths and your weaknesses. So recognizing the things you're good at, recognizing the things you're not so great at, being humble enough to get help on those things. Because I think sometimes we feel we have to be like the complete leader that exists in our imagination, which is probably modeled on the best bits of other leaders we've known. And that's impossible because we're not those people. And we're all of us bringing negatives as well as positives, strengths as well as weaknesses. And I think, you know, as I'm entering midlife, as I have entered midlife, I'm 51, I think I'm better at bringing my whole self to the task, which means I'm more confident about the things I can do, but I'm also more confident about the things I can't. And saying, actually, that bit, that's somebody else's role. I don't have to be all of that. I can just be me.
I think what you're saying there is, as well as having your strengths and your weaknesses, it's almost being willing and open to reflect on both strengths and weaknesses and think, how can I then improve from that? Because what we've discussed before is very much in line with that, of that experience to go, I need to reflect.
Absolutely. Reflective practice is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, we don't develop.
When you reflect, do you spend more time reflecting with others, or are you quite a good self-reflector and reflecting on your own?
No, I need to talk it through with people. I think my personality is quite extroverted. So I struggle to get in touch with what's going on in my inner world until I'm talking to somebody. So I'll often say, I don't know what I think until I've told somebody. So actually, the process we've been through today, you've drawn out of me things that are true to me, but I wouldn't necessarily have known I could articulate them in that way until we got to that moment. So it is one of the things, when I'm trying to write a sermon, for example, which is quite a solitary task. It's just you and a desk trying to churn out 2,500 words. I'll often do some initial reading around and initial thinking, and then I'll need to go and talk to somebody. And I'll just say to one of my colleagues, do you mind giving me half an hour? I just need to tell you. And once I've said it out loud and I've heard my voice say it, then I can go back and write it down. So actually, I reflect externally and I reflect verbally.
And I guess it's having that leadership power that you have, in the sense that you have the influence and you have people you can go to and be like, I just need half an hour of your time. Do you mind giving that to me? And they're more than willing to give it over because of who you are and what you represent to them.
Yeah.
In terms of a leader, then, I think one of the things you can definitely come away from this conversation is that you are a leader. You have a lot of leadership capabilities. And I think you're more than just, as you said, the collaborative and strategic leader. I think there is a lot more to you than that. I think they're your strongest bits, definitely, but I think there's a lot more to you than just those two.
Thank you. It's been a really helpful session. You said we'll treat it a bit more like a coaching session, and it certainly felt like that. I feel I've learned a lot, so thank you.
That's okay. Thank you very much for all of your insights as well, and everything that you're going to give our listeners as they listen back.
And until next time, remember, to lead requires us to continuously